The choir was already singing when the human frigate slid into the system, and the song did not change, because the choir had never once in its long life met a thing worth changing the song for. 40,000 vessels sang as one voice. That was the whole truth of the Concorde, the thing every species in 9 sectors had learned to fear, and then, faster, to obey. The Concorde did not have ships the way other powers had ships. It had bodies for a single mind, 40,000 of them, hulls and crews and guns, all threaded into one will that thought one thought at a time and moved every hull on that thought at once. When the choir decided to close a fist, 40,000 hulls closed it together, with no order given, because there was no one to give an order to, and no one to receive it. There was only the choir, and the choir was already turning, slow and certain, to look at the small gray ship that had appeared at the system's edge. It was a frigate. The choir's shared senses read it, and the reading passed through 40,000 minds in the same instant, and meant the same thing in all of them. Small, 210 meters, one hull, no fleet behind it, no second contact, no reinforcement folding in from the dark. A single human frigate, gray and blunt and unremarkable, holding station at the edge of a system the choir had come to harvest. The choir did not slow its song. It did not need to. It had measured the frigate's mass and its armament and its drive, and the measurement said the thing the choir's whole existence was built to make true. This would take no thought at all. The Concorde had ended 40 wars by being too large to think against. You did not outdecide a mind that made every decision with 40,000 hulls at once. You did not surprise it, because every eye it had saw the same thing in the same instant. You did not flank it, because it had no flank. Only a single body spread across a system, every part of it aware of every other part. The choir was unbeatable for one reason, and the reason was not its size. The reason was that it was one. A fleet could be divided. A mind could not. The frigate transmitted. The choir received the transmission in 40,000 places at once, and understood it as a single sound, the way a person hears a single word, though it strikes both ears. "This is the frigate Vesper Lance, Captain Dahlia Bren commanding," the human said. Her voice was calm in a way the choir found distantly interesting, the way one notices a detail one will not need. "You're harvesting the Tomac colony, 40,000 of you, against 300,000 civilians who never built a warship in their lives. I'm asking you once to stop." The choir answered. It answered the way it answered everything, with all of itself. 40,000 hulls broadcasting a single reply on a single frequency, and the reply was not words but the song itself. The great unbroken chord of the Concorde turned for one moment toward the frigate, so that the human could hear what she was speaking against. It was the sound of a mind with 40,000 bodies. It was the sound of a thing that had never been alone, never been uncertain, never once in its life had to wonder what another part of itself was thinking, because there was no other part. There was only the one. Dahlia Bren listened to the chord of 40,000 minds, and on the bridge of the Vesper Lance, she did a thing the choir's shared senses logged and did not understand. She smiled. "That's the problem," she said. "You only know how to be one. You've never had to learn what we learned." The choir did not ask what humans had learned. It did not ask questions, because a question is a thing you send out from yourself toward a thing you do not contain, and the choir contained everything it cared to know. It simply turned the harvest aside, one thought passing through 40,000 minds, and 400 of its hulls peeled from the main body and began to move toward the frigate, because 400 was the number the choir's measurement said would be more than enough, and the choir did not waste itself. 400 hulls, each as large as the human frigate, moving as one. They did not form up. They did not need to coordinate, because there was nothing to coordinate. They were already coordinated. They had been coordinated since before the human was born, since before her species crossed its own moon. 400 bodies of one mind, sliding through the dark in a formation so perfect, it did not look like a formation at all. It looked like a single thing reaching out a single hand. On the bridge of the Vesper Lance, Dahlia Bren watched 400 marks detach from the impossible mass on her display, and felt her gunnery officer go still beside her. His name was Cole Ferris, and he had served with her for 9 years, and he had seen things that would have broken most crews, and he was looking at 400 enemy hulls converging on one frigate, with the particular calm of a man who has decided to be afraid later, if there is a later. 400, Captain, Ferris said, and they're not even hurrying. No, Bren said, they're not. That's because they think this is one decision. 400 ships, one decision, made once, by one mind. She set her hands on the rail of the command station, and her voice carried to every station on the bridge, low and even and certain. They've never fought a thing that makes 400 decisions. We're about to teach them what that costs. She had brought one frigate to a system held by 40,000 hulls of a single mind, and she had brought it on purpose, and the choir, singing its unbroken song, had no way to understand why a thing so small would come so willingly to a place so large, because the choir had never in its life been small, and a mind that has never been small cannot imagine what the small have had to learn to survive. The 400 came on. The choir's senses fed every one of them into the single mind, and the single mind watched the human frigate the way a person watches a thing they are about to brush aside, with attention but without effort. The Vesper Lance did not run. That was the first thing the choir logged, that did not fit its measurement. A frigate facing 400 hulls should run, should call for help, should at the very least beg, and the human ship did none of these. It turned its blunt gray prow toward the 400, and it accelerated, into them, one ship against 400, and the choir adjusted its single thought by the smallest degree, the way a person adjusts their grip on a thing that has twitched. They're coming straight in, Ferris said. Good, Bren said. Let them. Helm, bring us into the heart of the 400. I want us surrounded. The helm officer, a young woman named Rhea Sandoval on her first deep posting, turned in her seat. Captain, surrounded by 400 ships of one mind, we can't break contact. We can't run. They'll have firing solutions from every angle at once. Yes, Bren said. They will. Every angle at once. One mind, 400 guns. Every solution shared the instant it's found. She watched the 400 marks open like a flower to take the frigate in. Now tell me, Sandoval, what happens to one mind when 400 of its guns all have a perfect firing solution on a target sitting in the exact center of all 400 of them? Sandoval understood. The choir did not. That was the whole shape of the thing, and it was already happening, and the choir was singing its unbroken song straight into the trap a single human had built out of the one weakness a single mind could never see. Because to see it, the mind would have had to be more than one, and the choir had spent its entire long life making certain it never had to be. The Vesper Lance drove into the center of the 400, and the 400 closed around it, and 40,000 minds at the far edge of the system held their great cords steady, certain, untroubled, having spent no real thought at all on the small gray ship, because the small gray ship was already, by every measure the choir possessed, dead. It was not dead, it was exactly where its captain had wanted it, and its captain was watching the 400 close with the steady eyes of a woman who had crossed 9 sectors of dark for this single moment, against a thing that had never once been beaten, because it had never once met a fight it could not solve with a single shared thought. Dahlia Bren had not come to outshoot the Concorde. No one outshot 40,000 hulls. She had come to do the one thing the Concorde could not survive, the thing no fleet of separate ships could ever do to it, but a single clever frigate could, if it was willing to put itself in the one place no sane ship would go. She had come to make the one mind try to be 400 minds at once, in the same instant, on the same target, and to let it discover, too late, that a thing built to only ever be one cannot become many and live. All stations, Bren said. We do this clean and we do this fast. The moment they fire, the moment all 400 of them fire on one solution, the song breaks. And when the song breaks, we don't stop. Not for anything. We have been planning this for 2 years, and we will not get a second pass. She looked once around her bridge, at Ferris and Sandoval and the rest, at the 9-year crew and the first posting recruits, at the one human frigate sitting in the heart of 400 enemy hulls of a single unbreakable mind. They sang with one voice for 10,000 years. We're going to make them learn, in the next 4 minutes, what it sounds like when that voice forgets the words. Ferris glanced at her, the way he had glanced at her in 9 years of impossible rooms, and said nothing, because he had learned long ago that when Dahlia Bren went quiet, and certain it was not the time for questions. The time for questions had been 2 years ago, in the planning rooms back home, and he had asked them all then, and she had answered every one, and the last answer was the only one that mattered now. A single mind cannot afford to be wrong twice in the same second, and we are going to make it be. The 400 hulls finished their flower around the Vesper Lance, 400 guns swinging onto one small gray target at the center of everything. 400 firing solutions resolving in a single shared mind in the same instant. And the choir, certain and vast and singing, opened its single mouth to close its single fist. And on the bridge of the frigate that should not have come, Captain Dahlia Bren said one word, quietly, the way you light a fuse you have spent 2 years building, and the word was, now. The trap was not a weapon. That was the thing the choir would spend its last clear thoughts failing to understand. The Vesper Lance carried weapons, good ones, but they were not what Dahlia Bren had built for 2 years. What she had built was a machine that did one thing, and the one thing was this. In the instant the 400 hulls fired on a single shared solution, the frigate moved, and it moved not away but through, on a course Bren had computed against the one fact about the choir that the choir itself could not see. A single mind cannot fire on the place a target is, and the place a target will be at the same time, because to a single mind, they are the same decision, and a decision is a thing it makes once. The 400 guns fired, 400 beams converged on the dead center of the flower, on the exact point where the Vesper Lance had been, at the instant the shared solution resolved, and the Vesper Lance was no longer there. It had moved on Bren's course in the quarter second between the solution and the trigger, a quarter second that meant nothing to 400 separate captains who would each have tracked and adjusted, but meant everything to one mind that had committed all 400 guns to a single answer it could not take back. 400 beams crossed empty space and struck what was on the far side of it, which was the rest of the 400. The choir shot itself, not by accident, not by a glitch, but by the iron logic of being one mind that had aimed all of itself at a single point and held nothing back, because holding back was a thing a single mind did not know how to do when it was certain. The song faltered. It was a small thing, at first, the smallest possible thing, a single note out of 40,000 going wrong, a handful of hulls in the 400 suddenly screaming damage into the shared senses, while the mind that owned them was still committed to the firing thought. The choir had never felt this. In 10,000 years, it had never once fired on itself, because in 10,000 years, nothing had ever made it want to be in two states at once. Now it was a mind that had just shot its own bodies, and it had to hold the knowledge that it was firing, and the knowledge that it was hit in the same single thought, and a single thought cannot hold a contradiction, and so for 1/4 of 1 second, the choir did the thing it had built its entire existence to never do. It hesitated. There it is, Bren said. Her voice did not rise. The song just cracked. Sandoval, the course holds. Ferris, you have weapons. Put everything we have into the hulls that are still trying to fire. Don't kill the damaged ones. They're doing our work for us. Kill the ones that are still certain. The Vesper Lance came through the heart of the broken flower at full drive and opened up. Cole Ferris had spent 2 years learning the firing pattern Bren had designed, and it was not the pattern of a ship trying to destroy 400 enemies, because a frigate could not destroy 400 enemies. It was the pattern of a ship trying to keep a wound open. Every shot Ferris placed went into a hull that was still functioning, still feeding clean certainty into the shared mind, and every hull he silenced was one less voice telling the choir that everything was fine, and the choir needed those voices, needed them desperately, because the song was held up by every voice singing it, and the song was the only thing the choir had ever been. The 400 tried to reform, the choir tried to make a new decision, a single clean thought to pull the 400 back into order, and it found, for the first time, that it could not, because a single clean thought requires that all the parts agree on what is true, and the parts no longer agreed. Some of the 400 were undamaged and reported a frigate fleeing. Some were burning and reported a frigate that had turned their own guns against them. Some were dying and reported nothing at all, just the rising static of bodies failing, and the choir had to be all of these at once, one mind holding 400 different truths, and it had never had to hold more than one truth in its life. They're trying to think, Ferris said, watching the 400 marks stagger out of their perfect formation, into something ragged and slow. Captain, they don't know how. They're a mind that's never had to disagree with itself, and now half of it is screaming, and the other half doesn't believe it. That's exactly right, Bren said. They never learned to be wrong in pieces. We did. Every human who ever survived anything learned it, because we've always been a few against the many, always been the small ship in the big dark, always had to keep fighting while half of us was screaming. We learned to hold two truths. They never did. They never had to. She watched the flower come apart. Helm, take us back through. Same course, mirror it. They'll have committed to a new solution by now, and it'll be just as certain and just as wrong. The Vesper Lance mirrored its course, and the choir, exactly as Bren had said, had committed all over again. The mind that could not hold two truths had reached for the only thing it knew, which was a single shared solution, and it had fired it, and the frigate had moved through the quarter-second again, and the 400 shot themselves a second time. This time it was worse, because the 400 were already wounded, already half screaming, and the second self-inflicted blow drove the crack deeper than the choir could seal. Where the first pass had made it hesitate, the second made it stutter, the great chord stumbling over itself, notes dropping out faster than the mind could replace them. On the bridge of the Vesper Lance, the comm carried it raw, and Sandoval, who had never heard the Concord sing, and would never forget hearing it break, gripped her console hard enough to whiten her hands. That's two, Bren said. 2 passes, 2 times they shot themselves, and look at them now. Look at the 400. She did not gloat. There was no room in her for gloating. Only the cold focus of a woman 2 years into a 4-minute plan. They're not a fist anymore. They're 400 separate problems that the one mind has to solve all at once, and it can't, because it only has one answer at a time, and it needs 400. Captain, Ferris said quietly. The main body is reacting, the 40,000. They felt that. Bren turned to the wider display, where the great mass of the Concorde hung at the edge of the system, and she saw that he was right. The unbroken chord of the 40,000, the sound that had ended 40 wars and frightened 9 sectors into obedience, had a tremor in it now, a tremor that had not been there when the frigate arrived. The wound in the 400 was not staying in the 400. The choir was one mind, and the 400 were part of that mind, and you could not scream in one part of a single mind without the rest of the mind hearing it. It's traveling, Bren said, and for the first time something close to awe touched her voice. Awe at the size of the thing she had set in motion. The crack is in their connection. It's going home. 40,000 hulls, all of them feeling 400 of their own bodies fire on themselves, twice, and none of them able to look away, because they're one mind, and a mind can't close its eyes to itself. She straightened. We didn't hurt 400 ships. We poisoned the well they all drink from. Now we hold position, and we let them feel it spread, and we wait to see what a single mind does when it realizes the wound is already inside it. For a long moment nothing moved, which was itself the most frightening thing the bridge had ever watched, because 40,000 hulls of a single decisive mind, sitting motionless, was not calm. It was paralysis. The choir was trying to make a decision, and could not, because every decision it reached for was the same trap closing, and the frigate sat in the middle of its space and let it learn that lesson, over and over. Sandoval, talk to me, Bren said. What's the Harvest doing? The young helm officer pulled the colony display. The Tomahawk colony hung below them, 300,000 civilians who did not yet know that the thing coming to harvest them had stopped at the edge of their system, snagged on a single gray ship. The Harvest hulls have halted, Captain. All of them. They were 3 hours from atmosphere, and they just stopped. They're not advancing. They're not doing anything. Because they can't, Bren said. Harvesting is a decision. Advancing is a decision. And the one mind that makes all the decisions just learned that committing to anything is how it dies. So it's frozen. 300,000 people just got 3 more hours of life because 40,000 hulls forgot how to agree on a single thought. She let out a slow breath. That's the whole game, crew. We don't have to beat 40,000 ships. We just have to keep the one mind from ever being certain again, because certainty is the only fuel it has. Ferris was watching the 400, the ones that had shot themselves, the ones now drifting wounded and slow at the broken center of the formation. Captain, the 400 are doing something. They're moving, but not toward us. And not toward the main body either. They're just drifting apart, spreading out. Bren studied them, and what she saw made her go very still, because it was the first sign of the thing she had hoped for, and had not let herself count on. They're not under the song anymore, she said. The main body is holding them at arm's length. It cut them out of the cord to stop the wound from spreading, and now the 400 are off the leash. They're not part of the one mind. For the first time in their lives, those 400 crews are alone in their own heads. She watched the wounded hulls drift, each one finding, slowly, that there was no shared thought to fall into, no cord to carry it, only the small private silence of being a single ship with a single crew. That's not a fleet anymore. That's 400 ships full of people who just woke up. They could turn on us, Sandoval said. 400 ships, even wounded. They won't, Bren said. Watch them. They don't know what to do. They've never had to choose anything. The mind always chose for them. Right now, every one of those 400 crews is staring at a console waiting for a thought that isn't coming. And the thought isn't coming because the main body cut them off to save itself. She shook her head slowly. 40,000 hulls just watched the mind they trusted cut 400 of them loose, without a heartbeat of hesitation. They felt it happen. You think the other 39,600 didn't notice that the song will amputate any part of itself, the second that part becomes inconvenient? The bridge was quiet. Outside, the great frozen mass of the Concorde hung in the dark, and the wound moved through it, and the 400 drifted, and the Tomac colony went on living, hour by borrowed hour, beneath a harvest that had forgotten how to close its hand. Dahlia Bren stood at her command station, with 2 years of planning paying out exactly as designed, and she did not relax, because she knew the most dangerous part was still ahead. A wounded single mind was unpredictable in a way a healthy one never was, and there were still 39,600 hulls out there, and they were beginning, slowly, terribly, to be afraid. The choir tried something new, and the trying told Bren more than any scan could have. A second formation peeled from the frozen mass, not 400 this time but 1,000, and it did not come at the frigate in a single closing flower. It came in 3 groups, spread wide, on 3 separate courses, and Bren understood at once what the wounded mind was attempting. It was trying to learn. It had felt, twice, what happened when it committed all of itself to one solution. And now, for the first time in 10,000 years, it was trying to do more than one thing at a time. 3 groups, 3 courses, 3 solutions. It's adapting, Ferris said, and there was real worry in it. Captain, it's splitting its attention. If it can hold 3 solutions at once. It can't, Bren said, but she watched the 3 groups closely, because if she was wrong, this was where it ended. Watch. A single mind can move its bodies in 3 groups. That's just geometry. What it can't do is want 3 different things at the same time. It's about to try, and we're going to see what happens to a thing that has only ever had one will when it tries to have 3. The 3 groups closed on 3 vectors, and the choir, reaching for 3 solutions at once, did the thing Bren had bet 2 years of her life on. It could not keep them separate. The single mind, trying to hold 3 intentions, blurred them into one. The instant pressure rose, because that was the only thing it knew how to do, and the 3 groups, each meant to do a different thing, all snapped to the same shared solution at the same moment, and converged, and the frigate was not where the converged solution said it would be, and 1,000 hulls in 3 groups fired across each other's paths into each other. There, Bren breathed. It can't be 3. It tried, and the second it mattered, it collapsed back into 1, because being 1 is the only thing it is. We just watched a mind try to learn the thing humans are born knowing, and fail in front of us. She did not smile this time. She had passed beyond satisfaction into something quieter and harder, the recognition of a creature meeting, for the first time, the exact limit of itself. That's the cruelest part, crew. It's smart, it's older and larger, and in every measurable way stronger than us. And it's going to keep trying to be many, because it has to. And every single time it tries, it's going to fail the same way. Because you cannot teach a thing in 4 minutes what we spent 1,000,000 years becoming. The 1,000 hulls reeled, burning. Their 3 groups dissolved into the same ragged confusion that had taken the 400. And now the wound in the main body was not a tremor. It was a fracture the whole mass could feel, 40,000, minus 400, minus 1,000, each loss carrying its scream back into the cord, and the cord was no longer a cord. It was a thing trying to remember it had ever been one. Sandoval was crying without seeming to know it, silent tears on a young face that had crossed 9 sectors expecting to die here. Captain, they're so big. They were always so big. My whole life the Concorde was the thing nobody could fight. And we're one ship. We're one ship, Bren agreed. And that's exactly why we could fight it. 40,000 ships of 40,000 separate minds, Sandoval. We could never have beaten. They'd have adapted. They'd have learned. One of them would have seen the trick and warned the others, and the others would have believed something different, and we'd have had no single lever to pull. She put a hand briefly on the young officer's shoulder. It's the oneness. The oneness was their whole strength, and it's the only reason we had a chance. The bigger the single mind, the harder it falls, because there's no part of it that can disagree with the part that's wrong. We didn't beat 40,000 ships. We beat one decision, made one way, by one mind. We just had to make it keep making that decision until it couldn't anymore. Outside, the Concorde hung wounded in the dark, 2 failed attacks behind it, the Harvest frozen, the 400 adrift, the 1,000 burning, and the great song that had ruled 9 sectors for 10,000 years, stumbling toward a silence it had no idea how to survive, and the frigate held its place at the center of all of it. One gray ship, 210 meters, waiting, because Dahlia Bren knew that a cornered single mind had one move left, the biggest and most dangerous of all, and she meant to be ready when it reached for it. The Tomac colony chose that moment to break radio silence, and the timing nearly undid everything. A civilian channel opened from the surface, weak and frightened. A colony administrator who had watched 40,000 hulls freeze at the edge of the system and had finally worked up the courage to ask why. Unidentified frigate, this is Tomac Control. We see the Concorde has stopped. We see one ship. Are you? Are you protecting us? Please respond. Don't answer that, Bren said sharply, but it was already done. The transmission had gone out, and the choir, which heard everything in the system at once, heard it too, and the bridge of the Vesper Lance watched the great wounded mass shudder as a single thought, the first clean thought it had managed in minutes, passed through it. The colony. The colony was the thing it had come for. The colony was below it, undefended, 300,000 civilians, and the frigate that had broken the song could not be everywhere at once, because the frigate was only one ship, and the choir, even wounded, even fractured, was still vast enough to reach the surface. It's going for the colony, Ferris said, already at his station. Captain, it's giving up on us. It's decided it can't beat the frigate, so it's going to take what it came for and pull out. 1,000 hulls are breaking for atmosphere. It thinks it found a solution, Bren said, and her mind was already 3 moves ahead, because this was the move she had known would come. The cornered mind reaching past the thing it couldn't beat, toward the thing it could. It thinks, I can't have the frigate, but I can have the colony, and the frigate can't stop me, because the frigate is one ship, and the colony is far. It's the first decisive thing it's done in 10 minutes, which means it's certain again, Sandoval said, understanding, her tears forgotten. Which means it's certain again, Bren said, and we know what to do with certain. Helm, full drive, intercept the leading hull of that descent group. Ferris, the moment we're in range, I don't want you to fire on the descent group. I want you to fire on the colony's own orbital relay. The big communications array. Knock it out. Ferris turned, stunned. Our own? The colony's relay? Captain, that's their only link to... Do it, Bren said. Trust me. 2 years, Ferris. Trust me for 4 more minutes. She watched the descent group plunge toward the Tomac atmosphere, 1,000 hulls of one mind reaching for 300,000 lives, and she watched her own frigate race to cut across them, one ship against 1,000, and she knew that everything now depended on the choir staying certain for exactly long enough to fall into the last trap she had built, the one she had not told the crew about, because some moves you cannot afford to have anyone hesitate over. The Vesper Lance crossed into the descent group's path, and Ferris fired, and the colony's great orbital relay went dark, and the surface of Tomac fell silent, cut off, blind, and the choir, reaching for the colony, suddenly could not see the colony, because the relay it had been using to track the surface, the relay the colony itself had been broadcasting on, the relay that had told the choir exactly where 300,000 lives were, had just gone dark by the frigate's hand, and the single mind that had finally, fatally, become certain again, lost the one thing its certainty had been built on. It had committed 1,000 hulls to a descent on a target it could no longer locate. And there it is, Bren said softly. It just dove 1,000 ships into an atmosphere it can't see, chasing a colony it can't find, because I took its eyes at the exact instant it stopped doubting. Now it has 1,000 hulls in a planet's air, blind, with no shared picture, and a single mind that has to fly all 1,000 of them at once, through weather and terrain it can't read. She watched the descent group hit the upper atmosphere and begin, immediately, to scatter, 1,000 blind bodies of one mind that could not see where any of them were going. It will pull them back, it has to. And pulling 1,000 blind hulls out of an atmosphere, all at once, on one shared thought, with no picture to share, is going to cost it more than both attacks combined. The bridge watched the wounded Concorde try to recall 1,000 blind ships from a planet's sky, and fail, and stumble, and bleed confusion into a cord that had nearly nothing left, and Dahlia Bren stood at the center of it all, one woman on one frigate, having spent the last of the colony's danger to drive the final crack through the largest single mind in 9 sectors. And she let herself, for one breath, feel the size of what was breaking, before she turned back to the work, because it was not finished, and a thing this large did not die in one breath, and she meant to see it all the way down. The 1,000 blind hulls came back out of the Tomac sky, the way a wounded thing comes back from a fall, in no order at all. The choir hauled them up through the atmosphere on a single shared command, but a single shared command meant a single shared ascent vector, and 1,000 ships scattered blind across a hemisphere could not all follow one vector, and so they collided with their own weather, and their own terrain, and each other, on the way up, and what limped back into orbit was less than 700 of the 1,000 that had gone down. Bren counted them as they cleared atmosphere. 300 lost in the descent and the recall, she said. Not to us, to itself. It killed 300 of its own hulls trying to pull them out blind, because it can only give one order, and one order can't save 1,000 ships flying in 1,000 different places. She watched the survivors struggle into a ragged orbit. Tell me, crew, how many shots have we actually fired this whole battle? Ferris checked, and his voice was strange when he answered. The voice of a man realizing the size of something. Counting the relay, Captain, we've fired 41 times. 41 shots, and they've lost, what? Closer to 1,700 hulls, Sandoval said, reading the count. 400, then 1,000, then 300 more. 1,700 ships. From 41 shots. Because we were never trying to destroy them, Bren said. We were trying to make them destroy themselves, and a single mind is the best weapon in the galaxy for that, if you can just get it to point at its own reflection. Every hull they've lost, they lost to their own guns, or their own orders. We've barely scratched the paint. We just kept showing the mirror to a thing that had never once had to look at itself, and didn't know how to stop. The Concorde, what was left of its forward strength, pulled back from the colony, and for a moment, the bridge thought it might be over, that the wounded mind would gather itself and flee. But it did not flee. It hung in the dark above Tomac, 1,700 hulls poorer, its great chord reduced to a broken murmur, and it did the one thing Bren had been most afraid of, the move of a cornered single mind that has run out of clever and has only size left. It called the rest of itself. Across the system, beyond the harvest force, the deep reserve of the Concorde stirred, the bodies that had not come to Tomac, the far hulls held in other systems, and they began to fold in through the dark, answering the wound the way a body rushes blood to a cut. Not 40,000 now, more. The choir was not just a harvest fleet, it was a power that spanned 9 sectors, and all of it was one mind, and the one mind had just been hurt badly enough, for the first time in 10,000 years, to call everything home. How many? Bren asked. Sandoval's voice shook. Folding in from the reserve, Captain. I'm reading. I don't. The count keeps climbing. 60,000. 80. It's still climbing. 100,000 hulls. More. 100,000, Ferris said. Captain, One frigate. We have one frigate. Bren looked at the rising tide of marks on the display, 100,000 hulls and climbing, the entire Concorde drawing itself together for the first time in its history, all of it summoned by a single gray ship, and she felt the fear in her bridge and she did not pretend it away, because her crew had earned the truth. Yes, she said, one frigate, and 100,000 hulls. And here is the thing they don't understand yet, the thing they are about to learn, because they have just made the single worst mistake a single mind can make. She turned from the display to face her people. They just connected everything, every hull they have, in 9 sectors, into one cord, to face one ship. And we have spent the last 20 minutes proving that the cord can break, that the wound travels, that the bigger the mind, the harder it falls. Her voice was very quiet and very certain. They didn't just bring 100,000 ships to kill us, they brought every part of themselves into range of the same crack. They made the single mind as large as it has ever been, at the exact moment we'd proven that the larger it is, the more there is to break. The 100,000 hulls finished gathering, and the chord they sang was the largest sound the galaxy had heard in 10,000 years, a single mind now spread across more bodies than it had ever held at once, and it was magnificent, and it was terrified, and it did not know that those two things were now the same thing. They're trying to heal, Bren said, watching the great mass pull itself into order. Look, the fresh hulls from the reserve, the ones that didn't see what happened, they're undamaged, certain, clean. The mind is using them to drown out the wound. It's pouring 100,000 healthy voices over the screaming ones, to make the cord whole again. She nodded slowly. It might even work. For a while. That's the danger. If it can flood the crack with enough certainty, it can sing again, and if it can sing again, it can think again, and if it can think again, 100,000 hulls will end us in a single thought. Then what do we do? Ferris said. We don't let it heal, Bren said. We've got one window, while the wound is still in the cord, before the fresh hulls drown it out. We have to drive the crack all the way through before they paper over it. And there's only one way to do that with one ship. She pulled up the firing solution she had built for exactly this, the one she had hoped never to need, the deepest part of the 2-year plan. We don't fire on the 100,000, we fire on the ones that are still screaming, the wounded hulls from the first 3 attacks, the 400, the 1,000, the descent survivors. They're folded back into the cord now, and they're the open wound. And if we tear that wound wider, right now, while the mind is busy trying to heal it, the crack spreads through all 100,000 before the fresh voices can seal it. Sandoval understood the cost first. Captain, to reach the wounded hulls we have to go in, past the fresh reserve, into the middle of 100,000 ships. Yes, Bren said, we do. One more time. Into the heart of it, the same as we did with the 400, except now the heart is 100,000 wide. She looked around her bridge, at the faces of the crew who had followed her this far, at Ferris, who had asked all his questions 2 years ago, and Sandoval, who had asked hers an hour ago, and the rest who had asked theirs in the long dark crossing of 9 sectors. I'm not going to tell you it's safe, because it isn't. I'm going to tell you that this is the moment we came for. 300,000 people on that colony are still alive because we came. 9 sectors of species that have lived in fear of the song for 10,000 years are about to find out it can break. And the only thing standing between the Concorde healing itself and the Concorde ending is one frigate willing to go back into the middle one last time. She set her hand on the rail. I've flown with most of you for years. I will not order you into this. I'm asking. There was no vote. There did not need to be. Ferris put his hands on his weapons. Sandoval set her course. Around the bridge, one station at a time, the crew of the Vesper Lance turned back to their work. Because they were not one mind that decided together. They were a dozen separate people who had each, in the privacy of their own heads, decided the same thing. And that, Bren thought, watching them, was the whole difference between her ship and the thing outside. The choir moved as one because it could not do otherwise. Her crew moved as one because every separate one of them chose to, and a thing chosen by many separate wills is stronger than a thing compelled by one, because it cannot be broken by breaking the one. Helm, Bren said, take us in. The Vesper Lance went into the 100,000. It should have been the end. a single frigate flying into the gathered body of the largest single mind in 9 sectors, 100,000 hulls in every direction, the kind of odds that no account of the battle would later believe. But the choir was not whole, and a wounded single mind cannot fight and heal at the same time, because both are decisions, and it has only one decision at a time. And right now, every part of it that was not screaming was bent on drowning out the parts that were. The 100,000 were not hunting the frigate. They were trying to become one again. And a mind trying to reassemble itself does not have attention to spare for a single gray ship slipping through its body toward its open wound. "They're barely tracking us," Ferris said, almost in disbelief, as the frigate threaded between hulls larger than itself, each one close enough to touch, none of them firing. "Captain, we're flying through 100,000 warships, and they're letting us." "They're not letting us," Bren said. "They can't see us. Not really. All of their attention is turned inward, on the wound, trying to heal. We're a splinter, sliding through a body that's too busy bleeding to feel where the splinter is. Stay the course, Sandoval. Take us to the densest concentration of damaged hulls. That's the wound, that's where we tear." The crossing took 11 minutes, and they were the longest 11 minutes of Dahlia Bren's life, not because anything happened, but because nothing did. The frigate slid deeper and deeper into the body of the 100,000, and the 100,000 did not strike, and the not striking was worse than any barrage, because at any moment the mind might finish its healing, might find the frigate, might turn one clean thought toward the splinter in its flesh, and end the whole story in a single shared volley. Every kilometer was a wager that the wound would stay open 1 second longer. Bren watched the cord on the comm the way a surgeon watches a heartbeat. As long as it stayed broken and murmuring, the frigate was invisible. The instant it steadied, they were dead. And twice, in the 11 minutes, it nearly steadied. Twice the fresh reserve hulls almost drowned the screaming, the murmur firming toward a cord, and twice Bren made Ferris fire a single shot into the nearest wounded hull. Just one, just enough to make it scream again, to keep the wound raw, to buy another minute of invisibility with another small cruelty she would carry home. "I hate this," Sandoval said at one point, very low, her hands steady on the helm even as her voice was not. "We're keeping them in pain on purpose. To stay hidden. We're using their suffering as cover." "Yes," Bren said, and she did not soften it, because the young officer deserved the truth, and would have to make her own peace with it, the way Bren had made hers in 2 years of planning. "We are. And I will not tell you it's clean, because it isn't. There is no clean way for one ship to stop 100,000. There is only this way, or the colony dies, or we die, and then the colony dies. I made this choice a long time ago, Sandoval. You don't have to make peace with it tonight, but hold the course." And the young officer held the course, and the frigate slid on, deeper into the wound. And Bren added, almost to herself, "Remember it though. Remember that it cost something. The day a human stops remembering that this costs something is the day we become the thing we came here to break." That was the difference, she thought, that no scan would ever read and no enemy would ever understand. The choir had never had to weigh a single life against another, because it had no separate lives to weigh, only itself. Her crew weighed lives every minute, disagreed about the weighing, carried the cost of it in private, and chose anyway. The Concorde moved without doubt because it had abolished doubt. Her people moved with doubt, through doubt, in spite of doubt. And that was not weakness. That was the strongest thing in the galaxy, because a will that has looked at the cost and chosen anyway cannot be unmade by showing it the cost. The frigate reached the heart of the screaming, the place where the survivors of the 400 and the 1,000 and the descent had been folded back into the cord, the rawest part of the single mind, and Dahlia Bren gave the order she had built 2 years to give. "Ferris, open it up. Everything we have, into the wound, not to kill them, to make them louder. I want every damaged hull in this mass, screaming at the top of its voice into the cord, all at once, right now, before the fresh hulls can drown them out." Ferris fired, and the Vesper Lance, one frigate at the center of 100,000, poured its weapons not outward at the vast healthy body, but inward, into the cluster of wounded hulls, tearing the half-sealed wound wide open, and the screaming the choir had been working so hard to silence redoubled and tripled, and the crack that the fresh reserve had almost papered over split clean across the whole 100,000 at the speed of the song itself. The core did not falter this time. It shattered. 100,000 hulls, one mind, and in a single instant, the mind was not one. It was 100,000 separate ships, full of 100,000 crews, waking all at once from a dream they had been inside their entire lives. Every one of them suddenly, terribly alone, the shared senses gone, the shared thought gone, the song that had carried them since before any of them were born, simply gone, and in its place, the howling private silence of a self that did not know how to be a self. It was the largest awakening in the history of the galaxy, and it was not joy. It was the purest terror 100,000 minds had ever felt, because they had never once been alone, and now all of them were, at the same time, in the dark, above a colony, around a single gray frigate that had done this to them on purpose. "It's done," Sandoval whispered. "Captain, the song is gone. I'm not reading a chord at all. I'm reading 100,000 separate ships." Bren looked at the display, at the vast mass that had been one mind, and was now 100,000 frightened strangers, and she did not feel triumph. She felt the weight of it, the size of the thing she had unmade. 10,000 years of a single will, ended in 22 minutes by 41 shots from one frigate, and she understood that what came next would decide whether she had saved the galaxy or only changed the shape of its danger. Ferris spoke into the quiet that followed, his eyes still on the vast, scattered mass that had been a single will. "Captain, in 9 years I've never asked you this in the middle of a fight. But how did you know? How did you know one ship could do this, when nobody in 9 sectors ever has?" Bren did not look away from the display. "Because I read their history, Ferris, and nobody else did. 9 sectors spent 10,000 years studying how the choir attacks, how it moves, how its guns are placed. I spent 2 years studying how it thinks. And the moment I understood that it thinks one thought at a time, with all of itself, I knew it wasn't unbeatable. I knew it was the most fragile thing in the galaxy, balanced on a single point, and that no fleet could ever knock it off that point, because a fleet is too many minds to aim at one place." She finally turned to him. "It took a single ship, willing to be the splinter. It always would have. Everyone was looking for a bigger hammer. The choir was never going to be broken by a bigger hammer. It was going to be broken by something small enough to slip inside one thought and stay there. Now we find out," she said quietly, "what 100,000 ships do. The first moment in 10,000 years that not one of them is told what to do. For 90 seconds, the 100,000 did nothing at all, and it was the most dangerous 90 seconds of the entire battle." 100,000 ships hung motionless above the Tomac colony, every one of them a crew that had just been severed from the only self it had ever known, and the silence on every channel was total, because none of them knew how to speak. The choir had never used words between its bodies. It had no need of them. It simply was everybody at once, and now that it was not, the 100,000 crews had no language for each other, no command structure, no captains in the way humans understood captains, only 100,000 frightened beings who had woken from a shared dream into a cold, dark room, with their hands on weapons, and no idea what to do with them. "This is the part I couldn't plan for," Bren said, very quietly, and for the first time all battle her crew heard something other than certainty in her voice. "I knew I could break the song. I never knew what would happen after. 100,000 panicked crews with guns and no leadership is not safe. It might be worse than the choir was. A single mind at least had a single purpose. This is 100,000 purposes, or none, and any one of them could start shooting, and the rest might follow out of pure terror." The first hull moved. A single ship at the edge of the mass, one of the fresh reserve that had folded in last and was least damaged, turned and ran. It did not run in formation, because there was no formation. It ran the way a frightened animal runs, straight out, into the dark, away from the place where the terrible thing had happened, and the moment it ran, 100 others saw it and ran too, and then thousands, the edge of the mass peeling away in every direction at once. 100,000 ships discovering, one at a time, that they could simply leave, that no shared thought was holding them, that for the first time in 10,000 years they could choose, and the first thing nearly all of them chose was to flee. "They're scattering," Sandoval said. "Captain, they're not attacking, they're running. All of them. every direction. Because every one of them is alone now, and alone, they're not warriors, Bren said, and the relief in the bridge was a physical thing. The choir was brave because it couldn't be afraid. It had no self to fear for. Now every one of those hulls has a self again, and a self that just watched 1,700 of its kind die, and the first thing a frightened self wants is to be somewhere else. The single mind would have fought to the last hull. 100,000 separate frightened minds just want to live. She watched the mass dissolve. We didn't just break the song, we gave them back the thing the song took. We gave them back the fear of dying. And a thing that fears dying does not throw itself at a colony for a harvest. But not all of them ran. That was the next danger, and Bren saw it before her crew did. A cluster of hulls near the center, the most damaged, the ones that had screamed longest, did not flee. They turned. They turned toward the frigate, the small gray ship at the heart of the mass, the thing that had done this to them, and even without the song, even without a shared thought, a few thousand wounded crews arrived at the same simple animal conclusion at the same time, which was that the cause of their agony was right there, and that they wanted it dead. "We've got incoming," Ferris said sharply. "Several thousand hulls, converging on us. And they're not coordinated, but they don't need to be. There's too many, Captain. Even uncoordinated, they'll—" "I know," Bren said. "Helm, get us out of the center. Now. We did what we came to do. We don't have to win a brawl against several thousand wounded ships. We just have to not be there when they arrive." The Vesper Lance turned and drove for the open dark, threading the dissolving mass, and the wounded hulls came after it. A ragged, furious cloud with no order and no plan. And for the first time in the battle, the frigate was simply running, one ship ahead of a few thousand, and the running was not a defeat. It was the last move of a fight already won, the splinter pulling itself free of the body it had unmade. The chase was short, and it was strange, because the thing chasing the frigate had forgotten how to chase. A single mind would have predicted the frigate's course, cut it off, closed every escape at once. The wounded cloud could do none of that. It simply followed, each hull on its own line, each one slightly out of step with the others, and where the choir had once moved like a single closing hand, the cloud moved like a thrown handful of sand, spreading, thinning, losing its shape with every kilometer. "They keep getting in each other's way," Sandoval reported, watching the pursuit. "They're not sharing solutions anymore, so they're not avoiding each other's fields of fire. Two of them just collided. Captain, they can't even chase us without hurting themselves." "Because chasing is a thing they only ever did as one," Bren said. "Every skill they had as a single mind. Flying in formation, aiming without crossing each other, predicting a target. All of it was the song doing the work. Take away the song, and there are 100,000 crews who never learned to do any of it alone, because they never had to. They're not bad pilots. They're crews who are flying solo for the very first time in their lives, in the worst possible moment, against the one ship that knows exactly how lost they are." She watched the cloud fray behind them. "Maintain speed. Don't fire. Let them tire themselves out. Every minute they chase us is a minute they're not regrouping, and they cannot regroup, because regrouping is the one thing 100,000 separate strangers with no language can't do." The cloud chased the Vesper Lance to the edge of the system and could not hold the chase together, and one by one, the wounded hulls fell off, peeling away into the dark to join the great scattering, until the pursuit simply dissolved, the last few ships breaking off not in defeat, but in the deeper confusion of crews who had forgotten what they were even chasing, because no shared thought was left to remind them. And then it was over, in the sense that the immediate danger was over, and the bridge of the Vesper Lance was silent in the particular way of people who have survived a thing they did not expect to survive. Ferris sat back from his weapons. Sandoval's hands came off the helm, and she looked at them as if surprised they still worked. Around the bridge, the crew breathed, and lived, and slowly began to understand the size of what they had just done. "Status," Bren said, "because the work was not finished until it was counted." "The Concorde is scattering across 9 sectors, Sandoval said, reading the long-range traffic, what little of it there was. "No chord, no coordinated movement anywhere. I'm reading 100,000 individual drive signatures, all going different directions. Captain, it's not a fleet anymore. It's not anything. It's just ships." "The harvest?" Abandoned. The hulls that were over Tomac are gone with the rest. The colony is clear. 300,000 people, Captain. They're alive. They don't even know yet, but they're alive. Bren nodded slowly, and she felt it land. The thing she had crossed 9 sectors and spent 2 years to do. 300,000 lives that would go on, because one frigate had come where no frigate should have come. But she did not let herself rest in it, because she had been a captain too long to mistake a won battle for a finished one. And there was a question still hanging over the bridge. The question of what she had actually made when she unmade the song. Ferris, she said. Open a wide channel. Every frequency we have. I want to talk to them. To whatever's left of them. While they're still scattered. While they're still afraid. Before any of them starts to think that being alone is something to take out on someone else. The channel opened, and Dahlia Bren spoke not to a single mind this time, but to 100,000 separate ones, scattered across the dark, each hearing her alone, which was a thing none of them had ever experienced, a voice meant for them, and not for all of them at once. This is Captain Dahlia Bren, of the frigate Vesper Lance, she said. I know you can hear me, every one of you, in your own ship, in your own head, maybe for the first time. I know what you're feeling, because my whole species has felt it since the day we were born. You're alone, you're afraid. There's no one telling you what's true, and it is the most terrible feeling there is, and I am not going to pretend to you that it isn't. She paused, and the dark held 100,000 silences. But I'm going to tell you something we learned, a long time ago, the hard way, the only way. Being alone is not the end, it's the beginning. Every one of you, right now, gets to decide for the first time who you are, instead of being told. That's not a curse. We thought it was, once. It's the thing that made us. Every separate, frightened, stubborn one of us, choosing, and disagreeing, and choosing again. It's slower than the song, it's harder than the song, and it cannot be broken the way I just broke the song, because there's no single thread to cut. You're 100,000 now, not one. And 100,000 who choose freely are stronger than one who only obeys, in the one way that matters, which is that you cannot all be made wrong by making one of you wrong. She let it sit. She did not expect an answer, and she did not get one, not in words, because they had no words yet. But the scattering changed, subtly, on the display. Here and there, in the great dispersal, ships slowed. A few drifted closer to one another, not in formation, not in accord, but in the first uncertain gesture of separate things reaching toward each other by choice. 2 ships, then a handful, finding that they could be near each other without being the same, which was a thing the choir had never once managed in 10,000 years. They're not reforming the song, Sandoval breathed, watching it, but they're not all running either. Some of them are grouping up, on purpose, talking, they're figuring out how to talk. They're learning to be many, Bren said softly, and there was something in her face that was not triumph, and was not grief, but held a little of both. 10,000 years they were one. It'll take them longer than 4 minutes to learn what we are. Maybe they never fully will, but they've started. And whatever they become, it won't be the thing that came here to harvest Tomac, because that thing needed to be won, and it can never be won again. She turned from the display. We did more than save a colony today. We didn't just break a weapon. We set 100,000 minds free, and we don't get to know yet whether that was a mercy or a mistake. We only get to know that the song that ruled 9 sectors for 10,000 years is over, and it was over the moment one of them, just one, had a thought of its own. It was not quite finished. One more thing happened, and it was the thing Bren had feared most, and could least have planned for, because it was the first free choice the Broken Concord ever made, and a first free choice can go any way at all. A group of the wounded hulls, perhaps 800 of them, did not scatter and did not group up to talk. They gathered, near the colony, in a tight knot, and they began, clumsily, to sing. Not the old chord, they could not manage the old chord, but a thing reaching toward it. 800 hulls, trying to force themselves back into a single mind by sheer will, because being one was the only strength they had ever known, and being alone was unbearable, and they wanted, more than anything, to go back. They're trying to reform the song, Ferris said, alarmed. Captain, 800 of them. If they can do it, If they can get even a small cord going, it could spread. It could pull the others back in. Let them try, Bren said, and she watched the knot of ships strain toward unity with an expression that was almost pity. Watch what happens. They want to go back to being one. Because one was safe, one was certain, one never had to be afraid. But they can't. And not because they lack the will, because the song was never something they could choose. It was something that happened to them, that they were born inside of. You can't choose your way back into a thing that only worked when no one was choosing. She was right. The 800 strained, and the harder they tried to force themselves into one mind, the more they fought each other. Because now there were 800 separate wills, each with its own idea of what the chord should be, and a chord cannot be argued into existence. The old song had worked, precisely because no one had ever wanted anything different. Now they all wanted it back, and they all wanted it slightly differently, and the wanting itself was the thing that made it impossible. The knot of 800 ships shuddered, strained, and then flew apart in confusion and grief, the last and most painful proof that the thing they had been was gone and could not be willed back into being. That's the cruelest mercy I've ever watched, Sandoval said quietly. They want to be one again and they can't, and the wanting is the exact reason they can't. Yes, Bren said. They'll spend a generation grieving the song. Some of them will hate us for taking it. I understand that. We took the only self they had. But we didn't replace it with nothing. We replaced it with the chance to choose, and choosing is the thing that hurts, and the thing that saves, and there was no way to give them one without the other. She watched the 800 drift apart into the larger scattering. No one ever chooses to become free, crew. Freedom is a thing that happens to you when something breaks, and then you spend the rest of your life learning to carry it. We just broke the biggest cage in 9 sectors. What they build out of the pieces is theirs now. It was never going to be ours to decide. That's the whole point. Ferris looked at the count one final time, the count that would be argued over in every war college in 9 sectors for 100 years. 43 shots, he said. We fired 43 shots, Captain, against 100,000 hulls, and we're flying home with full magazines on everything but the forward battery. He shook his head slowly. Nobody is going to believe this. There isn't a tactician alive who'll believe one frigate did this with 43 shots. Bren almost smiled. They'll believe the shots, she said. It's the rest they won't believe. They'll spend years studying our firing pattern, looking for the trick in the guns, and they'll never find it, because the trick was never in the guns. The trick was understanding that the strongest thing in the galaxy was also the most alone, and that the most alone thing is the easiest thing in the universe to break, if you're brave enough to climb inside it first. The Vesper Lance came about, one gray frigate at the edge of a system where the largest single mind in the galaxy had just come apart into 100,000 pieces, and Dahlia Bren set a course for home, the work done, the colony saved, the song broken, and behind her, the scattered ships of the former Concorde drifted in the dark, learning, slowly and painfully, and for the first time, the terrible and magnificent thing that her species had known since the beginning, which was how to be alone, and how to be alone together, and how those two things were, in the end, the same strength wearing 2 faces. The Tomac colony hailed them before they cleared the system, and this time Bren answered. The colony administrator's face filled the bridge screen, an old being with the stunned look of someone who has watched their own death turn around and walk away. Vesper Lance, the Concorde is gone. The whole harvest fleet, scattered, every hull, gone. We have been watching our scopes for an hour, and we do not understand. 40,000 ships, 100,000, and you are one frigate. The administrator's voice broke. 300,000 people on this world were going to die today. What did you do? How does one ship undo the Concorde? I didn't undo the Concorde, Bren said. The Concorde undid itself. I just showed it the one thing it had spent 10,000 years making sure it never had to see. She did not explain further, because the explanation would not have helped, and because some part of her knew that the less the galaxy understood exactly how it had been done, the longer the doing of it would protect every other small ship and undefended colony in the dark. Your world is safe. Rebuild your relay. Warn your neighbors that the song is broken, but warn them carefully. Because what comes after the song is 100,000 frightened ships learning to choose. And frightened things learning to choose are unpredictable. Some of them may come to you not as a harvest but as refugees. How you answer that will matter more than anything I did here today." She closed the channel before the administrator could thank her, because thanks were a weight she did not want to carry home, and because the work of a captain is not to be thanked but to be gone, on to the next dark place where one ship is the only thing standing between many lives and the thing that has come to take them. The journey home was long, and on the long quiet of it the crew of the Vesper Lance did the thing that crews do after they have survived the impossible, which is to slowly let themselves understand it. They had crossed 9 sectors expecting to die. They had gone into the heart of 100,000 hulls. They had broken the oldest power in the galaxy with 43 shots and a plan 2 years in the building, and they had come home, all of them, every separate stubborn one of them alive. It was the kind of thing that becomes a legend, and the crew knew it, and they were careful with it, the way you are careful with a thing that is too large to hold all at once. Sandoval found Bren on the bridge in the 3rd week of the crossing, during a quiet watch, and asked the question she had been carrying since the battle. "Captain, when you spoke to them, at the end, when you told them being alone was the beginning, not the end, did you mean it? Or was that just a thing to say, to keep them from regrouping?" Bren was quiet for a moment. "Both," she said. "It was a thing to say, and I meant it. Those are not opposites, Sandoval. The truest things are usually the most useful ones, because the truth has a weight that a lie never does, and a frightened mind can feel the difference." She looked out at the stars sliding past. "I meant it. We are the species that was always alone, always too few, always the small ship in the big dark. And every other power we've ever met that tried to be one thing, one mind, one will, one perfect unbreakable whole, we've watched it break. Because the universe does not reward the thing that cannot bend. It rewards the thing that can lose half of itself and keep going, because the half that's left still wants to live, on its own, by its own choice. The Concorde could never lose anything, because it had nothing separate to lose. That was its strength, and that was the whole of its weakness. And they were the same thing, and they always are. News of the broken song reached the 9 sectors before the Vesper Lance reached home, because news of that size travels faster than any ship. Every species that had lived in the shadow of the Concorde for 10,000 years woke to the same impossible report. The single mind that no fleet could fight had come apart, scattered across the dark, undone above a colony that no one would have spent a single ship to defend, and the thing that had undone it was not a fleet at all. It was one frigate, one human captain, one ship that should have died in the first 90 seconds, and instead had walked into the heart of the largest power in the galaxy and walked back out, leaving the power in 100,000 frightened pieces behind it. The sectors did not know what to do with this. For 10,000 years their fear had a shape, and the shape was the choir, and the fear had taught them to be careful, to be quiet, to never build a fleet large enough to draw the song's attention, to live small, and pay tribute, and survive. Now the shape was gone, and in its place was a new shape they understood even less. A species that lived on a few worlds, that fielded no great armadas, that had never once tried to rule anyone, and that had, when it chose to, ended in 22 minutes the thing that had ruled them all. They began, cautiously, to ask about humanity. They pulled what records they had, and the records were thin, because humanity had never made itself important enough to record. A scattering of colonies, a modest fleet of modest ships, no empire, no hegemony, no single will. A species that argued with itself constantly, that could barely agree on anything, that was forever divided into factions and parties, and 1,000 separate stubborn opinions, and the sectors looked at this and could not reconcile it with what they had just watched, because to them, a thing that could not agree with itself was a thing too weak to act, and humanity had just acted more decisively than any power in 10,000 years. It was Bren's own people, back home, who understood it first, because they had always understood it, because it was simply the truth of what they were. The thing the sectors saw as weakness, the constant disagreement, the 1,000 separate wills, the refusal to ever be one, was the exact thing that had let one captain do what she did. She had been able to imagine the choir's weakness because she had spent her whole life inside a species that was the choir's opposite, that had never once been one mind, and had survived everything anyway. She had looked at a thing that could only be one, and she had recognized, instantly, the prison of it, because she had spent her life being free of that prison, and had felt the cost and the worth of that freedom every day. When the Vesper Lance finally came home, there was no great fleet to meet it, because that was not how humanity did things. There was a single docking berth and a handful of officials, and a crowd of ordinary people who had heard the news and come on their own, separately, by their own choice, to see the ship that had broken the song. And that, Bren thought as she brought the frigate in, was exactly right, because a species that had come out in one organized mass to greet her would have learned nothing from what she had done. They had come the way humans always came, scattered and various and arguing about where to stand. And it was the most beautiful thing she had seen since the battle, because it was the living proof of the thing that had saved 300,000 lives, the thing the Concord had never had and could never build. A people who were many, on purpose, forever. In the years that followed, the 9 sectors changed in ways no one had planned, and no one could stop. The scattered hulls of the former Concord became, slowly, 100,000 separate things, and they did not become one power again, because they could not, and the galaxy that had braced for 100,000 new warlords instead watched something stranger and gentler unfold. Most of the freed crews, having learned what it cost to be a weapon for a single will, wanted nothing to do with being a weapon ever again. They scattered to the quiet edges of the sectors and built small lives, separate lives, the kind of lives the song had never let them have, and the few that did turn to violence found, to their fury, that they could not coordinate well enough to threaten anyone, because they had never learned to act together by choice, and learning it took longer than their anger lasted. The colony at Tomac became, of all things, a place the freed crews came to. The administrator Bren had spoken to remembered her warning, that some would come not as a harvest but as refugees, and the colony chose to answer that, not with guns, but with open berths, and the freed crews, who had expected to be destroyed by the people they had come to harvest, instead found a door held open, and a great many of them came through it. Tomac grew. It became a meeting place, a market, a school where former bodies of a single mind slowly learned the 1,000 small human arts of being separate together, and within a generation, it was one of the most alive worlds in 9 sectors, and almost no one who lived there could remember anymore which families had been the harvesters and which the harvested, because the difference had stopped mattering the day they all chose, separately, to stay. Dahlia Bren did not become a ruler, because humanity did not make rulers out of its heroes, which was, she always said, the smartest thing her species ever did. She went back to the work. There were other dark places, other single ships standing between many lives and the things that came to take them, and she flew the Vesper Lance into a good many of them in the years that followed, and Ferris flew with her, and Sandoval rose to her own command in time and flew her own ship into her own dark places, carrying the thing she had learned in 22 minutes above Tomac, that the largest power in the galaxy could be unmade by one ship that understood the prison of being one, and that the understanding came from being free, and that being free was the hardest and most ordinary thing her species had ever done. The war colleges of 9 sectors studied the battle for 100 years, exactly as Ferris had predicted, and exactly as Bren had predicted. They never found the trick in the guns, because there was no trick in the guns. There were 43 shots, placed with great care, into the one wound that mattered, by a crew that understood the enemy better than the enemy understood itself. The colleges wrote thousands of pages, and missed the single sentence that explained everything, the sentence Bren had said to Sandoval on the long crossing home, and never wrote down, because some truths lose their power the moment they are filed. The song was not broken by force. It was broken by a thing the song could not imagine, which was a single small ship that was not afraid to be alone, flown by a people who had never once in their history had the option of being anything else. There was a thing Bren never told the war colleges, and never told the young officers who came with their questions, and told only Ferris, once, on the long crossing home, in the dead middle of a quiet watch when the stars were the only witness. "I almost didn't do it," she said to him. At the very end, when the song shattered, and the 100,000 woke up alone and afraid, I had one more move ready. I had a way to drive the cracks so deep that the freed crews would never have been able to function as anything, not even as individuals, just 100,000 ships, drifting forever, in too much pain to ever rebuild. It would have made certain the Concorde could never, ever come back. Not as one mind, not as anything. She was quiet for a moment. I had my hand on it, Ferris. I had it ready, and I didn't use it. Why not? Ferris asked. It would have been safer, permanent. Because that's the move the choir would have made, Bren said. That's the thing it did to its own 400, remember? It cut them off. It amputated them. It sacrificed part of itself to be certain it survived. The single mind always reaches for certainty. Always. Even at the cost of its own bodies. Because it cannot bear to leave anything to chance. She shook her head slowly. If I had driven that last crack, I would have been doing exactly what the choir does. Choosing certainty over mercy. Unmaking 100,000 minds. Because leaving them whole was a risk. And the whole reason we beat them, the whole reason, was that we are not the kind of thing that does that. We leave things to chance. We let the people we break have the chance to become something we can't predict and can't control. Because that's what being free means. And a species that takes that away from others has stopped being free itself. She looked at him. I didn't use the last move because using it would have made us into a smaller, meaner version of the thing we came to stop. And then, what would 300,000 lives at Tomac have been saved for? To make the galaxy safe for a new single will. Ours? No. We came to break a cage. You don't break a cage by building a better one. Ferris was quiet a long time. Most captains would have used it, he said finally. Most captains would have, Bren agreed. And that's the only reason I'm not most captains, and the only reason that battle ended the way it did, instead of just changing whose boot was on the galaxy's neck. The hardest thing I did that day wasn't flying into the 100,000. It was taking my hand off the last move. It was choosing to leave the danger alive, because killing it all the way would have killed the thing in us that made the win worth anything. She turned back to the stars. Remember that, if you ever command. The moment you can win by becoming the thing you're fighting is the moment the real test starts. Anybody can break an enemy. The whole question, the only question that has ever mattered, is what you refuse to become while you do it. It was, Ferris always said afterward, the truest thing he ever heard her say, and she made him promise never to repeat it while she lived, because she did not want to be remembered as the captain who showed mercy to the Concorde. She wanted to be remembered, if at all, as the captain who broke the song, because that was the lesson the galaxy needed, and the other lesson, the harder one, the one about the move she did not make, was a thing each commander had to find for themselves, in their own dark, with their own hand on their own last move, the way she had found it in hers. Long after, when Dahlia Bren was old and the Vesper Lance was a museum, and the broken song was a thing children learned about in school, a young officer came to her with the question that every generation asked, the question the war colleges had never answered, the question the 9 sectors still turned over in the quiet of their nights. Captain, the young officer said, they had 100,000 ships. They had one mind that had never lost. Everyone says you weren't afraid. Were you really not afraid? Bren laughed, the dry laugh of someone who has carried a thing a long time. I was terrified, she said, from the first second to the last. Anyone who tells you a story where the human isn't afraid is telling you a story about a machine, and a machine could never have done what we did, because a machine doesn't understand fear, and fear was the whole weapon. She leaned forward. Listen, because this is the part they always get wrong. The choir was unbeatable because it was never afraid. It had no separate self to fear for, so it never hesitated, never doubted, never imagined its own death. And that was exactly why it died. A thing that cannot be afraid, cannot imagine the moment it loses, and a thing that cannot imagine losing, has no defense against the one who can. She spread her hands. I could imagine losing. I imagined it the entire time. I imagined it so completely that I could see, in advance, every single way the song would try to save itself. Because I knew what it would feel like to be that desperate. Because I had been that desperate. Because I am the kind of thing that can be. The choir never could. It went its whole long life never once afraid. And so when fear finally came for it, all 100,000 pieces at once, it had no idea what to do. Because we never gave it the chance to learn the one lesson that might have saved it. The young officer was quiet for a long moment. What lesson? That being afraid and going anyway is the only strength that lasts, Bren said. Every species that built itself to never feel fear, we've watched them all break, every one. Because the universe always, always, sends the thing you were sure could never come. The Concorde built itself to be one perfect, unafraid whole, and we sent it one small, frightened ship, and the small, frightened ship won, because it had spent its whole life learning to be small and frightened, and to win anyway. That's not a weakness we overcame, child. That's the weapon. That was always the weapon. We are the species that is afraid, and alone, and too few, and divided against itself. And we have buried every empire that thought those things were flaws, because they were never flaws. They were the reason we are still here, and the reason we always will be. She stood, slowly, an old captain at the end of a long life, and she looked out the viewport at the stars where, 10,000 years and one frigate ago, the greatest single mind in the galaxy had sung with one voice, and ruled 9 sectors, and feared nothing at all. 40,000 ships spoke with one mind, she said, to the stars more than to the officer. And then they spoke with 100,000, every one of them certain they could not be broken, because they had never once been many. We sent them one ship, one small, frightened, separate ship, full of people who argued the whole way there. And we taught them, in 22 minutes, the only thing we have ever really known how to teach the galaxy, that the thing that cannot be afraid has already lost, and just doesn't know it yet, and that the day it finally learns to be afraid is the day it forgets how to be one, and never remembers again.